Dr. Hines with Living the One Light. So this video is going to be different than any other video I've ever done, because this is actually a video of me being interviewed for the podcast of Chris Skidmore. His podcast is called On the Soul's Terms, and I highly recommend it. It's really beautiful. You've probably seen, if you watched me ever before, you've probably seen Chris and I do interviews conversations between the two of us. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and we also have done a number of joint conversations with Melanie Reinhart, the three of us together. So you may be already familiar with Chris, but this is the first time Chris has interviewed me. And it's actually one of the only times anybody has interviewed me. I'm almost always the person interviewing other people. So I wanted to name a few things about this video, this interview, because I just want to give you context for it. So first of all, the thing I think on the top of my being about it is that it is pretty vulnerable for me. And I think that's for a number of reasons. Number one, just again, I'm not typically the one being interviewed, but the circumstances of me being interviewed were so fascinating. It was like this divinely given moment, because as you'll see when you go into the actual interview, this was so interesting. So Chris reached out to me to interview me for his podcast because every month in the past year, he has gone through month by month through the zodiac. And each month he has done an episode two episodes, one where he talks about the zodiac sign of that associated with the sun in that month. And then he does a second interview where he interviews somebody who to him exemplifies that energetic. And typically that person has their sun in that sign. So my sun is in Pisces. He thought of me. It was a great honor that he thought of me because the other people he has interviewed are, pretty amazing. Like Melanie Reinhart, Brian Clark, Michael Mead, it's like, I'm very, very honored. So highly recommend going back and watching or listening to his interviews with all of these other people. But so what ended up occurring was that the day that we were supposed to do the interview had to be changed. And it ended up being actually the day before my actual birthday, the beginning of March. And I was born in Thailand, and Chris lives in Bali. So and I currently live in California. So we were doing this interview for me the day before my birthday. But in reality, in my birthplace, near where Chris was and lives, it actually was the morning of my birthday. And so what I felt in that moment was like this. It was that Chris was wanting to interview me about the being of me, the energetic of me that is Pisces, because that's the purpose of why he would ask me on his show, right? And what I recognized in that, and I'd be really curious to hear from those of you who also are highly Piscean, which a lot of you are, because you're here listening to me probably because you resonate with that Piscean part of me, among other things. But what I recognized in that moment was that it was like the divine was opening up this space where I was being asked to be really open and vulnerable, in particular with that Piscean part of me, which I certainly show to the world. It certainly is huge in, the work I do and all of it. But what I'm usually operating from is more of my Virgo self, which is like the temple that holds that Piscean self, and my Aries south node, my Venus in Aries on my south node and Chiron. Anyway, more of the leader, temple holder self. And so it's like my Piscean self is very, very present all the time. but it has a container, and it has like a, I want to say it has other energies holding it. So it's pretty incredibly rare that I feel safe enough with someone and then, really get asked, really invited to open that truly Piscean part of me. And it felt really vulnerable. It feels vulnerable even to be putting this video out, honestly. Not in a bad way. I mean, I feel safe doing it, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But it feels very tender. And so I'm sharing this partly because, again, I think a lot of you are also highly Piscean. I'm just curious, how that feels for you. And I think it's a really interesting thing to notice as we are learning about ourselves and learning about, we're coming more and more and more into all of these parts, embodying the whole being that we are, right? And that Piscean part is something that I think has gotten pushed away for a long time, in various ways, and now a lot of us are trying to come back into that, but that can feel really scary, and I hadn't thought of it in that way. So that's number one. The other part was so fascinating for me was that, again, as you'll see in the video, this was the morning of my birthday in nearish, I mean, in the part of the world-ish where I was actually born. And so in this really fascinating way, the experience of opening in the interview to Chris in that way and to all of you in that way ended up actually over the next day and weeks, becoming a portal, like a rebirth portal for me. So again, that's very, very sacred and personal for me to share that, but I feel like there's some reason I'm needing to share that. I think that a lot of us are coming into a time where we're feeling this kind of rebirthing energy. And again, just sharing that just in case it happens to resonate with you. But that's another part of the energetic that was going on in me as we were doing this interview. So I wanted to name it out loud in case that sparks something for you. And then I think the last thing I'll mention is, when we were another part of why I'm sort of, I don't know, a little bit about putting out the video, but again, I'm fine doing it, just like acknowledging that it's a little bit tender there, is because when we were recording for the podcast. So I wasn't recording, sitting here and with the visuals right and the lighting right and the blah, blah, blah. I was actually wearing the exact shirt I'm wearing right now, but but I didn't have it like all set up for the visuals, right? So I look at the video and I don't tend to, get nervous about any of those kinds of things. But again, probably that I'm just already feeling vulnerable with it. So there's that part of it that that comes up for me. But anyway, all of that said, it's a really beautiful interview. I hope that you really enjoy it. Is wonderful, wonderful experience and conversation, and just a beautiful healing time for me. I hope that you will feel, equally, like you can equally open and relax into it, and feel your own journey in relation to what I share about my own life and my own journey and myself as that Piscean being that I am and the Virgo being that I am and all of who I am. Yeah. And I share a few things that, I've never shared publicly, right? So it's again like it's a little something, but yeah, it's also right. So and last, I'll say that Chris is doing a 12-month series in my astrology course this year, which you can join even if you're not part of the astrology course. So you can join the astrology course. We're 2 months in, but even if you're not part of the astrology course, you can join the monthly series with Chris if you are called to do that, if you resonate with him. And I'm there too, but it's mostly Chris running the show for that series. And that is meeting once a month. We have done the first month in March. We'll be doing the second month in on Aries in April, but it's all recorded. It's all there. It's all ready if you feel called to join. We would love to have you. And yeah, definitely connect with Chris's podcast again, On the Soul's Terms. I'll put the links here. So many beautiful interviews, so many beautiful talks. If you haven't watched, our recent video, for example, with Melanie Reinhart, highly, highly recommend that. Yeah, enjoy. All of the above. Anything that calls to you. Thank you again. See you soon.
Okay, so welcome to the show, Martha Alter Hines.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Piscean episode and this final this final episode of the cycle that we've been in since Aries season last year. It's been such a wonderful journey, and as I was contemplating who to bring on for the Pisces episode, you just really popped into my mind, and I guess it'd be a good place to start. Well, you popped into my mind because not only do I know that you have the Pisces sun, but there's also these other connections throughout our chart, which is probably a bit too technical for the audience to get into, but many, many connections. And I was thinking about how you've invited me onto your channel, and we've had these incredible discussions. Both the two of us have had some really amazing chats, and then Melanie Reinhart has been the third of our grand trine, as one of your guests or one of your listeners put it the other day. Part of our grand trine of exploring. We've been exploring Venus and Inanna, and then so many other things. And I was just kind of aware of, like, I'd love to flip the table here and have and really get to know you, because I feel you've always been really getting to know me, and although we do know each other from all of our different exchanges, it's like we haven't actually had the opportunity for me to interview you and hear your story. And so that is part of the desire to have you on the show and to really hear about your own journey that has so many similarities to my own. There's a real Piscean through line to your journey. And so firstly, just welcome to the show. And I wonder, I know this is going to be a broad question, but can you introduce yourself to us?
Oh. That is a very broad question.
Yeah, well, I warned you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. And I'll first just say, I was very honored when you asked me, because I absolutely love your podcast, and your guests have been a little off the chart and how beautiful they've been. And so just thank you for the honor of having me here on that level. And then number two, as we were talking about before we started recording, it is pretty unusual for me to be the one being interviewed, because I do have the Pisces sun in my 7th house. And so I think in the last 2 years, I've interviewed 80 people, more than 80 people.
80 people.
It's somewhere in that. Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's a pretty unusual opportunity for me, actually, is this Pisces sun in my 7th house, to be the one who gets to just be myself. And also, as I was saying to you before we started recording, it's also pretty significant to me that I feel like I trust you enough to really open my Pisces self to you, and to be to talk about myself in this way, right? And so I also have a Virgo moon, which maybe we talk about that. I was born on a full moon in Virgo, and yeah, so I have that dance between my Pisces and Virgo self. And I guess, how do I introduce myself? I mean, I can say another thing I think that is so beautiful and interesting about the moment that we're recording this. We also talked about this before we started recording, is that I was born, something about me to introduce myself. I was born in Bangkok, Thailand. Um, and we happened to be recording this on the morning of my birthday, where you are in Bali, not too far from Bangkok. But I'm over here in California. So where I'm actually sitting, it's not quite my birthday yet, but it is for you, right? And you happen to
Yeah.
be there nearish where I was born. So yeah, so who am I?
So happy birthday, Martha.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
for people more astrologically minded, the solar return, which is where the sun returns back to the exact same spot each year, which is kind of like your astrological birthday, was about half an hour before we got on the call, or within an
Yeah.
hour of our call. So we really are kind of like highlighting this sun of Martha's that's in Pisces in the seventh. Um, I guess a lot of people listening are like, what does that mean? What is that? What does the seventh house mean? Would you, should we just kind of like open a little bit about the seventh
Yeah,
here?
go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the seventh house is an interesting one in astrology. It's opposite the first house. So it's opposite this house of the self. So it's essentially the house of the other. So as Martha's saying, 80 people that she's been interviewing, and then maybe only occasionally being interviewed herself. And perhaps when she's interviewed, she leans into her first house cusp, which is the ascendant, which is Virgo, and her moon in Virgo is there. So, maybe present something that is Virgoan in the sense of ordered and structured and these kinds of things, or, you know, maybe a bit more mindy, a bit more of a, yeah, organized and prepared, perhaps. But that
Well, and
Piscean, so yeah, go on. Yeah.
well, and I would say a big thing for me with my Virgo moon is feeling like myself in a very self-contained temple, like a very sacred temple where I have all I need in myself in a sense, right?
Mm,
Um, and then for me to open the Pisces part feels like I'm opening that Virgo temple and letting you actually see me,
right.
right? As opposed to that more, yeah, organized priestessy
Yeah.
being that is also me,
Mm,
but is more of maybe what I show when I'm the one facing, you
yeah.
know. Yeah.
So then when I ask the question of introduce yourself, it's a more difficult question than it sounds. Because of
Yeah.
course you want to introduce not your Piscean self, but your other self or other selves, one of the
Yeah.
others that could hold court, or but opening to the images that are here in the moment. I think that's the Pisces
Mhm.
experience. So I guess, when I ask introduce yourself, it's like introduce your sun, because in
Mm.
astrology the sun is the self, and that the
Mm.
ascendant is more like the persona or the thing that we present.
Mm.
Um, so the question ends up being, although a pretty simple question, it's a complicated one, isn't it, or a complex one to get into. So
Yeah.
maybe I could ask it this way: how has that Pisces sun shaped your world and your worldview and your experience of life, shaped your journey through this life?
Yeah. I like that question. So what comes to me is um like I was saying, I was born on this full moon. I was actually born at moon rise and sun little before sunset in Bangkok, Thailand, right?
Mm,
Um, so the moon was, I mean, precisely on the horizon,
hmm.
which I think is really interesting. And and so I was born in Thailand, but I was actually my parents were living in Bangladesh at that time. So they had flown to Thailand to give birth because the Bangkok hospitals are better than the ones in Dhaka. Anyway, but so a lot of my childhood was in South Asia. And when you ask that question, how does, the Pisces sun inform my life? The image that immediately came to me was when I was 8 years old. I lived in Peshawar, Pakistan, and I have these memories of being um so Peshawar, for people who don't know, Peshawar is on the border of Afghanistan. It's where the Khyber Pass is. So the Khyber Pass is it's the part of it's this mountain road that's really famous. Like Alexander the Great went through there. A whole series of um different empires came through the Khyber Pass, like the Ottoman Empire, the Mongols, there were all these ancient layers of time that came through that, literally through that road. And so I have these memories. My dad used to take me and my sister to various locations near Peshawar and other parts of Pakistan. And I remember even as a child, I wasn't conscious that this is what was happening, but we would go to these old ruins. And they're like I have this one memory of my dad would take us to this ruin. It was this huge pile of shards of pottery. And the pottery there was shards of pottery from all different time periods. So like Ottoman, the layer after layer after layer after layer of thousands of years of ruins, all just sitting there, nobody examining it, nobody taking it. It just was there. And this is in the mid 80s. And when we would walk up to the top of that pile, and then we would eat kebabs and naan, right? Like sitting on top of literally layers of time. And when I look back on it now, what I remember is that I was feeling and I was seeing the layers of time in my being. Like again, I wasn't conscious at age 8 that that's what was happening, but I know now that I can see it in my mind, all these layers that I was feeling on an energy body level. And that's something that is still true for me, that when I go to any place, and also when I have my hands on people, this is maybe my Virgo, maybe my Mercury in my 6th house in Pisces, I don't know. But anyway, one thing that's true for me is when I put my hands on people and when I'm in a particular place on the earth, I see layers of time of the being of the person and also of the being of the place. And that was true for me even as a kid, but I didn't understand that's what was happening.
Wow.
That's what comes up when you ask that question.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's exactly it, isn't it? So this is an amazing image that you're bringing forward, and one that I hope that my podcast is attempting to do. Now that you mentioned the image, I'm like, oh, it's a bit like that, what we're trying to do here, the layers of history, actually. And of course, this is the fascinating thing about an individual human history or a collective human history or a earth history. It is just examining multiple layers, isn't it? Like that is archaeology. And at some point you get to a layer where the more rational understanding of things, it doesn't really work anymore because you've just got a couple of fragments and you're piecing them together, and actually you're filling in the blanks. We think this whole archaeological process is a super rational, sensible thing to do, but actually you're looking at this little bit of something and this painting in a cave and then extrapolating, ultimately. And that's to do it the Virgo way, I would say. To do it the Pisces way is to see and then experience that there's a reality underneath these layers of history. There's a reality underneath all these ceramics that you can actually feel, kind of like when Hermes is singing his first song, he sings to Mnemosyne or Mnemosyne, the uh, the mother of the nine muses, whose name means cellular memory. And so there's a plugging into some kind of a cellular memory that's happening. Um, and how that happens is who knows, right? I mean, it just begins to happen.
Can I follow up with
Yes,
actually
please.
part two? Because
Yes,
you're just,
part
I'm just
two.
remembering it. There
Yeah,
is a part two.
good,
And it fits with exactly what you're saying, like the
good.
how. I don't have an
Mm,
explanation for the how. But
hmm
so this what I was describing was when I was 8 years old, right? In the mid 80s. And so fast forward to my mid 20s, I think. Um, when I was in my mid 20s, I moved to California. And I got married and I had kids. And anyway, but my kid's dad at the time, my husband, he lives in LA. And anyway, there was this one time I was thinking maybe it was my mid to late 20s. We went to LACMA, which is the LA Museum of Art, LA County Museum of Art. And they have some I love all those museums. And they're in the basement of that museum. I don't know if it's still true, but at that time there was a beautiful display of Indian art, like art from India or the subcontinent of South Asia and various parts of what used to be called India. So we're, enjoying it, looking around, and um, we got to this one spot, and my entire being was like a magnet. I went like, straight over to this one display, and there was a little piece of pottery, and I was like, and my entire being just went straight to it, and I had no idea why I felt this way, but I could feel it. And I said, I know exactly where that's from. And what I had was the memory of that being on top of that mountain of shards of pottery, right? So then I looked at the display and they had a description and then they had a map of the part of the continent, sorry, the Indian subcontinent, precisely where it was from. It was from that part of Pakistan.
Wow.
And I went, oh my God.
Mm.
Um, how did I know that? I
How
have
did you know that?
no idea.
Mm.
No idea. So
Isn't that
there,
amazing?
how?
Yeah, yeah.
How? Right.
It brings to my mind the idea that Piscean energy at its core is the process of forgetting and the process of remembering.
Mm.
Because there's just too much. This is why I think the transition from Aquarius to Pisces, as in that point that holds the two of those signs together, is the Aquarian ideal, which I absolutely respect and honor as well, is trying to gather all the information that's possible to be gathered. And the Piscean ideal is that's just not possible to gather all the information here because there's so actually in the desire to know, we're going to cut out a lot of things.
Mhm.
But you can understand it because we need to have that canon of knowledge. That's obviously true. Um, and yet when we go into the Piscean, there's that is a little bit tiny. That's a really good image of because there's a smallness to it, and it holds an enormous memory, or it holds a piece of history or something. It holds a piece of our collective knowing, and even your what you tapped into in that moment is it's so absurd that I think that the mind just goes like, let's just I think it'd be easier to understand reality if we take all of those little things of those moments, which I think in any given life, and maybe put this out to the audience of like, when have you, as the listener, when have you had that moment, or when in your life have you experienced that? Because it's probably quite common to experience something that there's no explanation for, there's no how, but you just have this like flash of, or a deep soul knowing of something, and it turns out to be correct. But you can sense how, because there's so many of them and they don't really line up in a logical framework, we just kind of put it all over to the side and just put it over there as like, I don't really understand that. So let's just kind of like take it out of reality and something just weird and coincidental and, this kind of thing. And Pisces chooses to not do that. This is, somebody explained to me when I was in my 20s and I met these series of mystical older women, witch characters, I suppose, or wisdom keepers, that there's like that flirt from the universe, and rather than ignore it, they go with it. That was the basic description of, say, clairvoyance or mystics or mediums. Rather than say, well, that can't be, that's not, there's a drifting towards that thing rather than away from it. And that's the basic premise of gathering that kind of information you're talking about that has no how to the knowing. So what did you do with this? So this is an 8-year-old Martha who's experiencing this, and then later in LA, you're experiencing that memory. What did you yourself do, given that there's a lot of that other mutable energy in your chart, the other mutable signs like Sagittarius and Gemini and Virgo? How did you integrate or disintegrate this information?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is so interesting because I'm trying to let my Pisces sun lead in myself right now as I'm,
Yeah.
engaging with your questions. So where that sun takes me next is when I was about 21, I was in college, and since high school, I had been attending the Unity Church with my mom, and there was somebody there who taught Reiki, and there was something in me, I could not learn Reiki. It was like I had to do it. And so when I was in college, I learned Reiki. And what happened was that when I was first learning Reiki, that then opened up this whole part of me that clearly had always been there. This whole, Piscean part of me, I think, where before that, I wasn't not interested in spirituality. I wasn't not it just, none of it was very conscious. And what happened is that I realized really quickly, again, that when I had my hands on people, I this line I'm feeling numb, and past this line I'm not feeling numb, and I could pinpoint it with my hand. And then I started realizing not only could I feel what they're feeling in their body, but I could feel their emotions, and I could see their spirit guides. I could see their past lives. I could see those layers of time in their being. I could see the experience, lots of various experiences they had had in their own life. So this whole world just went like opened up. But in the meantime, I was in college, and then I graduated, and I went straight into social work school.
Mm.
So I got my master's degree straight out of undergrad, went into my master's degree, and learned how to be a psychotherapist, similar-ish to you.
Yeah.
And so, but in the meantime, I was, compelled by this hands-on healing journey that I was also on. Um, but it became like I wouldn't say fractured, but like it was one there I had my social work side and then I had my spiritual side. And I
Mm.
didn't share my spiritual side with almost anybody. And I graduated from social work school, various other things, occurred. And then I got I worked for a year in social work and then for various reasons I took a break from social work and I went to massage school. And then I spent 5 years being a massage therapist, where again, even more and more and more and more of all of that started waking up in me, and all these other like bizarre hands-on healing abilities that I couldn't explain started waking up in me. So I focused on that for 5 years. And then I got married, had my first baby. Um, and then I decided to go back into social work. And then I was a psychotherapist and a social worker for the next however many, many, many years. And during that time, again, I shut off. I didn't shut off. I segmented this more
Mm.
Piscean part of me over to one side. And I would have experiences as a social worker and as a therapist where, you know, I would allow that part of me to open up in my own awareness for a moment. And there would be so much there in the field, like with me and the client, but I couldn't talk about any of it. I couldn't be honest about it. So it was, yeah, that was a whole journey. And eventually, as you know, I left social work and then now I'm actually living both as one.
Mm.
Um, right. So I just fast forwarded through a bunch of stuff, but that's yeah, that's where the
Yeah.
my Pisces sun took me.
Yeah. I don't want to fast forward past that though, because I find that really fascinating, in the background. In the background, wait a second. In the background for me is this ever since I read the letters that were exchanged between Freud and Jung around the time of their split. I don't know if you know
Mm,
this, but
mm-mm, mm-mm,
basically that that there's an idea that Jung was like a student of Freud's because he was about 20 years younger than him, but it was more like they were colleagues coming at psychology at this kind of really at the dawn of psychology. It was very young at the time, and so they, the first time they met, they had like a 13-hour conversation. So there was obviously very deep connections between the two. I think they share this point in the zodiac together where I think it's yeah, Freud's sun and Jung's moon are both in Taurus at the same degree. And there's something
mm,
about that kind of connection, almost like erotic, but not in a sexual way, like a some kind of like deep respect and love that occurred between them. The fact that you could speak with someone that you've just met for 13 hours
mm,
really speaks to something. But then eventually what happened was that there was a split started to arise. And as the split starts to really form between them, we're blessed that it was a time in history where it was common to write letters and send letters because that was sort of like the technology that you had, the postal service. And so these letters would go back and forth, and it's all publicly. There's actually a book that collects them all. It's a big book of the letters between the two of them. So that's how much they were writing to each other. And right near the end, um, Jung was speaking to the need to include within psychology parapsychology and the impact, like the phenomenon of synchronicity, mediumship, um, all these strange occurrences, and include that within the psychology that was being formed. And Freud quite famously said, "We need to." This is the quote from him. We need to um, we need to form a bulwark, which is like a boundary against the black mud tide of occultism.
oh
So
wow.
he's very clear of what he thinks about that whole world of Jung. And then Jung was like, well, I cannot go any further than this if that's your attitude towards this world. And so the
Wow.
split that forms between the two of them, and that's why I think we're sort of the children of the divorce of Freud and Jung, right? That's where, so that when this more hidden Piscean world opens up, it's not like it's a personal shame. I don't think
Mm.
it's a personal shame. It's something that happened with our forefathers where there was a split that happened in their own philosophy. Now you can understand, like Freud saw the whole thing as very dangerous and scary because it is dangerous and scary. It can open up into all these other worlds, but that doesn't discount those other worlds. It actually, by that very statement, it brings a reality to those other worlds, a reality he was would prefer not to embrace. So maybe that's the materialist side of the Taurus the part, right? Like, let's just make the material world real and the non-material world not real. And that will make things a lot more simple.
Mm.
But in that simplicity, it has a violence to it because it is a splitting off or a cutting off. So I'm really fascinated because I can feel you exploring the split. I can feel me exploring the split. And I think there's many out there probably listening that can also attest to exploring this split, the split being the material world and the immaterial world, or the subtle realm and the manifest realm, we could say. Better words than real and not real, which is what we tend to think of it as, which came up in the Pisces episode with Faye last time, rather than think of that reality versus non-reality, which is how we tend to couch our language around it. It's more like the material and the immaterial, or the manifest and the subtle, something like that. So as you're in social work, you've kind of gone in the direction of psychotherapy. You're in these sessions where there's a way to be and there's a formula to follow and there's diagnoses, I suppose, and all these other things. While you're in that field, your Piscean soul or spirit is like entering the room and you're having these experiences, and then you have to not speak to them. I mean, what is that like? Can you cast your mind back there and tell me what that's like? Because I feel like
Yeah.
that's your full moon you're born under, no?
Mm. Yeah. Well, a couple things. I mean, one thing that's so interesting is that at that time, so in this moment as we're talking, I'm about to turn 47, right? You're in the day I'm 47 and I'm in the day I'm 46.
Like cusping, yeah.
I'm turning 47. So, what's so fascinating to me is that at that time in my 30s, mid 30s, I guess it should probably be, I had this I had a knowing that someday I would live in a way where I knew I was meant to live all of who I am, right? That I
Mm,
couldn't possibly live my whole life. Like I knew that I didn't come to the planet to live split like that and
yeah.
hiding half of myself.
Mm,
But I had this when I would pray on it, I would get shown my mid 40s would be the
mm.
time when it would manifest. Here we are.
Wow.
So that's number one, which I find really interesting. And then number two, yeah, how was it for me? It was sad. I felt sad. I felt like alone in a certain sense. I felt frustrated. I felt and actually in a certain way I still feel a little bit, if I'm really honest.
Mm,
It's like how honest do I want to be here? But if I'm really honest, I actually even still feel a little bit sad and a little bit alone, just in the sense that at this point in my life now, I do have quite a huge number of people who I can share these things with. Obviously, I
right.
have a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
You know, I've been on videos with thousands and thousands of views. It's not like I'm
Yeah.
not sharing it.
Right.
But even at this point in my life, if I'm truly, truly being honest, There are very few relationships in my life that are not professional where I can really be all of me,
Mm,
actually.
mm,
So there's still a little bit of, not a little bit, there's still a pretty significant amount of me wanting a equal relationship, personal relationship where I can truly be the Pisces being that I am, in a vulnerable way, and not only the Pisces sun, seventh house, I don't know, more of the on display version, right? That's still actually a desire, a need in me. But back then it was very definitely strong. Because I just didn't, I had maybe three people in my life I talked to about my quote unquote spiritual side at all, period. At the same time, though, I also knew that I was meant to, or I felt like I was meant to be there and I was meant to be present with those gifts, even though I couldn't talk about them. So
mm,
certain things would happen, like I think in the last interview you and I did with Melanie, actually, we talked about Cheroklo energy a lot.
mm,
It was an
mm,
amazing conversation. And one of the things I described in that conversation we had was how one of the one of the roles I played in social work was that I would interview children who were abused, and I had to write reports for the court on, what these children had gone through and what they needed, and I was assessing the parents and the children and trying to basically give the court a prognosis for how likely, anyway, what did the child need, what did the parent need, blah blah blah. Okay. So, but what would often happen is that what I realized is that when I would sit with these children, there were all these protocols, how do you interview a child about abuse, blah, blah, blah. And what I finally came to was that for me, what worked the best was to say nothing. Not all the time, but with little kids, especially preschool age kids, I would we would go into the room, I would bring out certain kinds of toys like sand tray toys, and I would just sit down and I would, in a sense, I would turn on my Pisces self or my Cheroklo self or whatever it is, right? And I would just sit down, and what I would be focusing on was pure love, that I just really cared about this child. And I would sit down, and it was like, I described this in the interview we did with Melanie, but like it would be like this golden light would just come into the room and then click. And then you know, children typically would feel really, really safe with me. So they would just start doing their thing and playing and doing the sand tray thing. And I would just observe. And I wasn't turning on my, like, quote unquote psychic ability, nothing like that. I was just really, really present with them. And within 30 minutes, 45 maybe, I knew, everything about them,
mm,
everything they're feeling, all of what's gone on in their life, their relationships with everybody in their life and the quality of it, and who were they scared of, who were they not scared of, because they would show it. They would show it in their play. Just it was
mm.
blatantly obvious. And I would write my court reports based on having said nothing. you know? So I mean, was that my Piscean side? Was that just being skillful as a social worker? I don't know. It's probably a combination of all of the above. But then like a year would go by and the therapist of that child would come to me having read, they would read the court report I had written, and then they would work with the kid for a year and then come back to me a year later and go, how the heck did you know that after,
Right.
one interview with this kid? And it took me a year to realize you were right. Like I thought there was no possible way you were right.
Mm,
But anyway, I don't know. So on the one hand, it was frustrating. On the other hand, it felt like there was some purpose to me being there, even if I had to hide that part of myself. It got used, in certain ways, I think, in a good sense. Um, so it was a
And
mixed bag.
are you saying that they would open up and share this information, or you would just see this information?
No, they would show it in their play.
They would show it in their play.
Yeah.
So
Like they
that
would
to me is the
configure. Yeah.
Pisces, to be able to detect within their play.
Mm,
Like that's reading tea leaves for me.
mm, mm,
And as much as we'd like to put that in a frame where you're gathering particular information from the play and all this kind of stuff, put it in a frame that makes sense. You're reading the tea leaves, you're reading the constellations. This is you're constellating their experience off of the sense impressions that you're picking up from
mhm,
you're attuning, actually, right? That's what you're
mhm.
doing. It's an
Yes,
invisible
that's true.
process, and then what you're getting is the information just all as a one, yeah, all as just one thing.
Yeah.
And then it's complete, that information, in a way, because you don't have to fragment it in order to get it.
Mhm.
You don't have to split it apart and everything.
Yeah. And if
It's
I had inserted questions,
right.
often what would happen is that it would fragment the whole,
Yeah.
right? And then suddenly it would like dissipate
Mm.
and they would shut off. Not always, but that's often what I noticed is that if I just stayed back, the whole being of them would come forward
It's
and be
so
present.
interesting because it really reminds me, and when you shared it in our other video, it reminded me of this too. It reminded me of yeah, I didn't share it then, but I'll share it now. There was when I was in Perth around 2016, I was kind of like a little bit in between stories and not quite sure whether I go to Bali and do what I'm doing now or stay in Perth where I was. And I was doing like a business course there to figure out how I might run my craniosacral therapy practice successfully in Perth. So I'm like doing a business course around, trying to use craniosacral therapy, kind of like a good way to describe how that split in my own life of like how do you survive in this world and do what you love when what you love is like very odd and people don't really understand it. So on this course was a Sri Lankan woman. I won't mention her name because I don't have the permission to, but she was a brilliant Sri Lankan woman. And one day she had a stroke. So she spoke 7 languages, right? At the time, she had a stroke where her left brain basically was taken out. And they were like, yeah, she'll never be able to speak. She'll never be able to do all these things that the left brain, she'll never be able to make sense of things. And she remembers hearing this information from the doctors and disagreeing in her, because then she's solely right brained, right? Basically, she's solely in the imaginal at that point. And she kind of refused the information. And so instead, she was able to heal and she was able to use her right brain to do all of these different functions again. But she lost all of those languages. So she had to relearn the language that was sort of there, which was English. But she's even lost her Sri Lankan languages and she's lost all those other languages, right? And before this, she was she was a pilot, very, very left brain oriented individual. And yeah, her way of being in the world. Yeah, she was a chess master and a pilot, right?
Mm.
And after this, she can't be a pilot. She's lost all those languages and she's relearned English, but lost all those other languages, including her native tongue. How amazing is that? So she goes into, because she is pulled towards it, working with kids with autism. And one of the things she tells me about this, and it really stands out, like she'd go into the room, sit with this kid completely ignores her and goes about his or her own thing. And she just sits with him. And then an hour passes and she just leaves. And this is the session, right? And then she goes back and sits with him. And then she just leaves and sits with him. And then eventually in one of these sessions, the kid turns to her and goes, "Who are you?" And that now they have an in, right?
Mm.
And that is so interesting because she proclaims to heal people with autism,
Mm.
heal people from autism. And her method is kind of like what you're saying of you're describing the inner process more than she would describe it. I think for her, she's doing all the things that you're talking about, but maybe isn't describing them as such, or isn't actually saying that that's what she's doing. She's just saying that she's just sitting there. And then eventually this kid gets interested. And in that interest, she's actually an incredibly chatty individual. So she's kind of actually know what she said she'd be doing Vipassana meditation, I think. I think that's the piece that was missing from my story. She'd be meditating. So she's sitting, meditating, the kid's doing their thing, her thing, his thing, not interacting. Until eventually there's an interest. And then in that interest, there's a bridge formed. And then they begin to exchange, and then the healing begins to happen around the autistic process, which I think about autism as being locked in the left brain, right? So the interaction with someone locked in the right brain is probably where the logical and the imaginal, or the Virgo and the Pisces, are bridging each other in this process. And I wonder if that's also occurring in that room in ways that are largely imperceptible. Because I think of that story as like, well, whoever's funding that process is probably looking at it going like, this is going nowhere. Nothing is happening. The kid's not showing any signs of any change until suddenly miraculously comes out of, I think in that story, this kid had not spoken for a really long time and then just starts to speak. And then they just start to exchange, and the healing kind of occurs. The bridging of the left and the right brains, right? The bridging of the Virgo and the Pisces, as we'd say it within the astrological language.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense of this split. And I really appreciate that what you're saying here today is that we're not in a kind of an interview here where the storyline goes like, had this early in your life, felt split off from it and went in different directions, now healed and telling us about it. Actually, the split still exists for you. And you still experience it where you can walk the bridge in your professional life, but in your personal life, there's less opportunities to walk the bridge.
I would say there's less opportunities in my personal life to not be in my seventh house. How do I say this? I don't have, my life right now is pretty unbalanced in the professional area. Let me put it like that. Most of my interacting with humans tends to be me as a leader, me as holding space for, 20 people or 100 people or 1,000 people. And then when I have time to myself, my Virgo moon wants to run away and I go and, go for walks by the ocean by myself. That's I need that to balance. But then at the same time, I'm sitting there over in my Virgo moon temple by the ocean, and I'm thinking, well, this is good. I need this space to myself, and it would be great to be able to open myself in that way that I do publicly, but have it not be public all the time, right? Like that, I think that's now my truly honest personal prayer that I barely have even named out loud.
Yeah.
But now I'm naming it out loud.
And what prevents you? What is it about the professional sphere versus the personal sphere that, what prevents you from doing that with other humans in the everyday, regular worlds?
Well, again, I'm reflecting in a way I haven't actually. I think part of what my journey, where I am in my journey in this moment, is that I've only really gone fully into this way of being in my professional life in the last 2 years. And And what has occurred is that when people, so suddenly there's lots and lots and lots of people coming into my world who I can relate to in this way. I mean, lots and lots of them, right?
Mm.
But what's happened is that when they come into my world and they suddenly see that there's this opportunity to relate to me, they become a client.
Mm.
So, which is great, which is wonderful. I absolutely love my clients. I mean, it's like amazing. I have so fulfilling. It makes me cry all the time how amazing these beings are. Uh, and then it's just hard to then end up with almost anybody who can relate to me in that way and doesn't want to be my client,
Mm.
right? And who I feel drawn to relate to on a just a human level. And where they're not going to turn around and say, "Oh, could you read my chart for me for free?"
Mm.
That
Mm.
it's so um yeah, I think so. I think I'm because I've been so focused in the last 2 years of just opening up this space to get to the point now where I'm able to support my children and I'm able to support myself through what I'm doing. I'm just barely at the point where it is now, I mean, going really, really well. And I think I'm at a turning point um where I could now make space for the personal to come in also, right? So I
Mm.
could be met in that way in a personal sense.
Mm. Yeah. It makes me think of those houses of astrology and which house people kind of slot into, and how we interact and where we interact and what format we interact in. And I suppose listening to you and feeling that Virgo moon and how that must equate that safety with a certain structure of relating. Perhaps, I
Mm.
mean, this is just what's popping up for me. That there's a structure in which then the Piscean side is allowed within that, with that, because that's also
Ah.
seventh house, right? I think of it as a one-to-one contractual relationship, which could be therapeutic, or it could be business, or it could be, colleagues, or whatever it might be in that structured seventh way.
Mm.
Um, and that Virgo moon finds safety in putting those kinds of rooms, those temples there, and
Mm.
interacting within those temples. And I suppose a friendship, which is not seventh house, it's more 11th house, would be
Mm.
to just be able to free flow in and out of conversations, that there isn't that it is closer to an equal, even though the seventh house, being a Libran house, wants to be equal. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? It actually sets up non-equal things.
Mm. Mm.
Whereas
Mm.
the 11th house, which is friendship and Aquarian, is closer to equal and equality, isn't it? Because
Mm.
surely within friendships, we get the closest that we can get to that layer of equality. So there's a resistance for some reason to being in that field. Or maybe this is just the way, maybe this is just the fate of it. Or maybe it's evolving. I don't know. What do you think?
My hope is that I'm just in a phase.
Mm.
Because it's not on a, again, I'm being really honest and reflecting in a way I haven't
Yeah.
maybe yet until this moment. Um, it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And again, I love my work and I love my clients. And I am so excited about what's opening up in the in the course that the astrology course I'm teaching that you're part of. And it's like I feel like the world literally could change through the way people are showing up in my community, right?
Mm.
For real. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I do notice that this other side of me is neglected a little bit right now.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, I actually yes, I feel like I need it. I'm at a choice moment where I can choose to then also let in, give attention, give energy in another way.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I think it takes me making that choice, which I have been just in the last like week or two,
Mm.
actually, which is really interesting. Yeah.
And so getting back to your story, because I feel like we're in the part of where I feel like there's two parts to the story. One that we're at right now, we're sort of sitting in your story. There's the part where you've become the social worker, psychotherapist, and in these sessions, and especially with the children of these pro probably horrible situations, you're able to attune and discover a year's worth of therapy in a session, this kind of thing, discover through the unconscious all the information that takes a long time to get to through the conscious. So we feel you there kind of like in the split of things, but doing your work, and there's some way that it's arising anyway in that field. And then we have the sense of you where you are now, which I think, like when I describe you to people, I say the first word I use is a channel,
Mm.
that you really are a mystic in that sense, that you attune to information that is not evident and or not obvious and not materialized, and you bring it forward. And so, like when we've done some of the things we've done together, like a few of our workshops, and what I really appreciate is that you just attune to something and you spend a little time there and then just let it come through, um, in that way. You're an astrologer, with a real emphasis on, all those other ones that I'm not so familiar with, like all the asteroids and all of the, kind of all these others, basically. Um, Whereas I kind of stick mostly with the planets and the luminaries, and plus Chiron and usually Lilith. You've got like all these other characters, which to me is fascinating because I love the myths, and all those mythical characters show
Mm.
up in your astrology. And I'm like, oh, how do you get Asclepius in there, and Eros and Psyche, and amazing. But
Mhm.
for me, I'm kind of like, I find those in the myths, but I don't find those in the sky. So you've got this very vast, knowledge of astrology, which has somehow come in through your life. You operate really more as a channel. You bring a lot of amazing people into your world, like these 80 people that you've interviewed. You gather, you create symposiums, you gather information and knowledge and sharing, and a lot of that sharing is coming from this kind of otherworldly. So you're in a place now that is very different than being a social worker and a psychotherapist and in the system trying to assist from within the system. And now you kind of like maybe at the fringe of the system, still trying to impact, obviously, the world. And you feel the sense of like getting closer to what could change the world, but you're operating now from the fringe. Um, Maybe. So how do you get from there to there? What's this? We've got a we've got a gap in the story. How does it happen?
Yeah. Yeah. How does it happen? Um, okay, I'm gonna sit with that for a minute and let it come through, just like you said.
Yes,
'Cause
exactly.
my mind is going in five different directions.
Yes, it
Um,
tends to. Minds, that is.
yeah, okay, so I think there's two threads. There's a 2018 thread and then there's a 2024 thread.
Okay,
And if I start with the
good.
2018, can you bring me back to the
I
2024
will keep the
in a second?
2024 thread, which
Okay.
is very recent thread
Yeah.
in the picture.
Is this moment. Yeah. So so to be able to kind of fill in the gaps for you, the 2018 moment is pretty key. Um, so yeah, and we're skipping through a lot here, of course, but so okay, let's see. So what ended up happening, very long story, very short, is in 2018, I was still in social work, and I at that point was yeah, I was a supervisor for our Child Protective Services agency. I was working for the county government, and I was overseeing this really, really intense, like the unit within Child Protective Services that was working with the most intense families, the
Mm.
highest risk families. And so I was overseeing this program that was kind of experimental, and it was, bottom line, we were trying as hard as we possibly could not to take children from their families. And it was a little bit controversial because it was so cutting edge and very progressive. And anyway, long story short, we ended up getting a new director, and that director was much more conservative. And I'm way on the liberal progressive end. And so there's an end of social work that's more like police-ish oriented, and then on the other end is more social worky oriented, and I'm definitely way on the social worky end. So this new director came in who was more on the police end, and she looked at my program and went, "Oh, no, 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 no. This is
Mm.
way too touchy-feely, way too counsel-y, you know. You're being way too nice here." And she basically got rid of the program. So so she wanted me to go back to the other position I had been in before I was overseeing that program. And so clearly I was really upset. And I came home and I prayed. I closed my eyes to begin to pray. Like, what the heck? This is terrible, right? So so anyway, I began to close my eyes to pray on what to do. And immediately, so here's the bridge
Mm.
between the two worlds.
Mm.
Immediately what happened is I had a circle of 8 spirits come to me. This had never happened before. I'd never seen these spirits before. And they were smiling and they were so happy. And they said, "Yes, this is exactly what needs to happen. This is so good. Yes, take that, go back to your old role." Basically, that was, so before I had been overseeing this program, I was an adoption social worker. And they said, "Yeah, great. Go back to being an adoption social worker. And what that's going to do is going to mean that you're going to need to go 1 hour north of San Francisco once a month. And when you go," and I was like, what the heck are you talking? Like, really, what the heck? Because I live 5 hours south of San Francisco, right? So
Mm.
this idea that I would go an hour north of it's very precise, an
Mm.
hour north of San Francisco once a month, did not know what they were talking about. And they showed me this vision, this image of me sitting outside of a natural food cafe or restaurant or something. And I was typing. I was sitting at a table and I was typing. And they said, "So when you go an hour north of San Francisco once a month, we need you to begin channeling." And I had never channeled before. I didn't know what the heck they're talking about. I mean, I knew what channeling was, but anyway. And they said, these were their exact words: "What you channel will become the platform for what we need you to do next."
Huh.
So I called up my boss and I said, "All right, yes, I'll voluntarily move over to this other position." Um, and she said, "Great, you start on Monday." So I started on Monday, and I'm not kidding. On Tuesday, my second day in the job, I got assigned a case of a kid who I would need to go visit once a month, who lived an hour north of San Francisco.
Wow. Wow. Crazy.
Really crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like a brand new client
Uh-huh.
who just happened to be exactly there. So for the next, like year and a half or whatever, um, I went every month an hour north of San Francisco to see this kid. And so what ended up happening, the first month I went, I had this really long story, long, horrible story, which I will not recount, but there was this really, really traumatic situation happening with this kid. And I had to go visit him, and I came out of the home and I was really traumatized. I was so upset. And so my guides said to me, "All right, look on your phone for a health food store." So I did. And I just put in my phone and I just, started driving there. It was 45 minutes away. And I got to this store, and I was approaching the store, and as I was approaching it, I started to feel these like tentacles coming into my back
Mm.
energetically, right?
Hmm.
And I could feel them like trying to hook into me, and I could feel that what was going to happen was that I was going to start channeling for the first time. But I was still driving, and I was like, I'm still driving. Like, I need 5 more minutes. Like, hang on a second. So I got closer and closer. And as I arrived, um, I needed to use the bathroom, right? So then there started, like, I could feel this channeling. And I'd never channeled before. All this stuff started wanting to flow through me. I needed to use the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom really fast. I was like, just let me wash my hands. Oh my goodness. So I ran to my car. I got my iPad, which had a keyboard. And this place, I had never been to this health food store. It had tables outside. So I ended up sitting outside this natural food store, typing on my iPad keyboard, channeling for the
Mm.
first time ever.
Mm. Wow.
Precisely the vision they had shown me. I was like, what in the world is going on? So
Wow.
anyway, that's where the channeling started. And what they started to channel was it's the messages that come through me now, which are basically, this was in the summer of 2018. And by September of 2018, they said, okay, we need you to channel a book. And it's actually going to be the first book in a series of 8 books. And the first book is called Living the One Light. And the whole series is called the Living the One Light series. Anyway, and that's where it all, like, what I do now, that's where it began. But it was a year later that I actually left social work and blah 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 blah. Yeah.
Mm. Wow. I mean, so the opening of the channel and the guides and and all of that, and then the precision of that story is really fascinating.
Hmm.
How everything aligns, and beautiful, amazing stuff. And I love this celebration of these 8 deities or whoever it is that's around you, and the really lived experience of the other world coming to life ultimately, to be foregrounded rather than backgrounded. And so I imagine then there's a transitional few years. So then that's 2018, 2024. Give me that thread.
So basically that in that 6-year period, 2019 I left social work officially. I was gonna, then, launch what I'm doing now, but then COVID, my 2
Mm,
kids were home from school.
of course.
My younger one was barely 8 years old at that point. Anyway, so I basically took a break for whatever amount of time that was, a couple of years, to be really focused on my kids. And then in 2022, 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, on my birthday, actually, on my birthday, exactly 2 years ago, um, was it anyway, that's a whole different thing. But that birthday occurred 3 days after the third pass of my Uranus opposition. Like,
Mm,
and on my birthday, I felt this lightning bolt come through my body, and I was shown the vision, like the literal outline of the first symposium that I held, which was the
mm,
Rebecoming the One symposium, which I then held in June of 2022. And then I held the second version of it in June of 2023, which is where you and I then met. Um, and so it's in the last 2 years since then when I really, really, all of what I do has really taken off.
mm,
Um, but the 2024 part, which I think feels really important to name, this is where I'm noticing the social work component fitting back into what I'm doing now.
mm,
So that's a whole topic, but I can just sum it up by saying what I'm noticing is coming alive the most in the work I'm doing now is that I think what I'm really being asked to do is to hold space. I am not meant to be a guru on a mountaintop telling people what to do or what the truth is or whatever
Mm,
that, that version. That's not who I'm here to be. Um, what I'm being called to do really is to hold, it's like being a midwife. It's holding space for that same remembering that you were talking about Pisces being
mm,
the forgetting and the remembering. Um, what the spirit world says is that we are midwifing ourselves back into a remembering of who we really are, right?
mm,
So in all of the the spaces that I hold, what is happening now is so powerful because, again, long story short, um for example, I'm holding this astrology course and I'm doing it in a way that is not so much teaching people that Pisces equals this and Virgo equals this, etc. It's more a feeling of, okay, here is what Pisces is typically talked about. Here is what Jupiter is typically talked about. But let's actually honor and be with these cosmic beings themselves. And let's honor and be with your being and your soul and what is truly present. So again, it's like me being in that room with that 3-year-old who's going to do the sand tray. It's like I'm being asked to really just sit and be, and then allow in an honoring way the actual being of each of our souls and the being of our cosmic uh family, if you want to, I don't know what word to use, to be able to show itself, right, in that whole
mm,
way, like those 3-year-olds would with the sand tray play or whatever it is. um yeah, and again, just to sum it up, what I'm also noticing in the people who tend to gravitate toward me is that when they see an example now, and this is very recent, when they see an example of an astrologer who doesn't offer space in that way, who
mm,
wants to do the more top down, telling the truth, quote unquote, they are getting very upset. And it feels like this, almost like a revolution coming from the inside out, that I'm not standing here telling people to, revolt at all. That it never even occurred to me that this kind of anger and this like insistence on being honored would start to emerge from people. But that's just recently starting to be what's happening in my
mm.
community. And um yeah, so that's the 2024 moment. And we will see where it goes from there. But
We will,
I feel
yeah.
it like the social work and the social justice, and
Mm,
the um Piscean joining in new ways to
mm.
be revealed.
Yeah, and I can't help but feel the tension point. Well, I have this tension point in my own chart, but I can speak to the tension point between these two archetypes of Jupiter on the one hand and Chiron on the other. Um,
Mm.
you know, that because Jupiter does live on the top of Mount Olympus, and is the king of the gods, and is the one who holds that wisdom, the top down wisdom. And Chiron lives on the opposite side of Mount Olympus, on Mount Pelion, down in a cave somewhere that is really hard to find. And but people do find it miraculously, and then they come to him for healing. And obviously Chariklo is there as well, and his wife, and he has a daughter whose name means flowing river. And so you get this sense of the cave wisdom that'll never be pronounced from the mountaintop. and the mountaintop wisdom that'll never find its way into the cave,
Mm.
and the tension of point that exists between the two. So, for me, as we talked about during the week in preparation for the course, it's like, how do we get the best of both of those where we don't have to castrate the Sky
Yeah.
Father
Yeah.
as Gaia did, um, in order to protect the earth wisdom, you know?
Yeah.
How do we get that? Or we don't have to um, shove these things that don't fit into our Sky Father vision back into the earth because we don't like the look of those, as Uranus
Yeah.
did right at the beginning of creation in the Greek myths, right? He just didn't like the look of those things. They were ugly to him, so he shoved them back into the womb. So there's abuse on both sides. There's castration on the one side, and there's basically rape on the other. And both of them are horrible situations. But we can also see the birth of Venus coming out of that Aphrodite energy. We can see that there's a way to, I I certainly feel this, that there's a way to have both, because I like sitting back and hearing the Sky Father speak, actually. This
Mm.
is, when it comes down to it, I like somebody that's just got the information. I don't
Mm.
feel like castrating them. And
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes I agree because I've been really pulled much more into Chiron's cave, especially in the last few years. But I'm just kind of more Chiron. I just feel a more um, maybe a resonance feel with the Chironic cave-like wisdom. So I get the sense of being put off by top-down information because maybe we've gone too far in that direction. But yeah, I feel like a real urge to speak to, even though that's not my particular style. I appreciate those who do have that style. It's just if it becomes dominance, if it becomes like the Sky Father Uranus in the beginning of creation, abusing the earth in order to bring out this particular knowledge, then that's obviously a negative that needs to be corrected for. But we have to remember that in the Greek myths, that correction was a castration.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
in that castration, it sets up the entirety of the Greek, like that one conflict between the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, Uranus and Gaia, plays through the whole of the cosmology again and again. And it perpetuates itself because we get lopsided one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's a way to restore the marriage of Sky Father, Earth Mother.
Well, and guess where my Jupiter is?
Yeah.
My Jupiter is in Taurus in my
Uh-huh.
ninth house.
Uh-huh. In Taurus in the ninth. There we go. So earthy wisdom and
But
Jupiterian
very
and ninth housey.
prominent, very
Yeah.
prominent Jupiter, but in
Very
Earth.
prominent. Yeah, there we go.
And guess where
Yeah.
my Chiron is then on my south nodes.
In Aries.
In Aries, yeah, conjunct my
Yeah. So
Venus.
you have
But
an earthy Jupiter and a fiery Chiron. So we have this kind of like strange
mhm.
connections between those energies. But yeah, I
And
mean, I
they're
can,
both very strong in me, both of them, right?
yeah,
So,
as
mm-hmm,
they are in me. Um,
mm-hmm,
one of the many ways our charts connect and we connect to each other. So that's
mm-hmm,
really fascinating. And I can feel one of the things from a Jungian depth psychology perspective is looking at the way that your individual story interacts with the world story. And I can feel the way that your individual story is interacting there, um, in so many different complex ways that we'll never fully understand. And we don't need to fully understand, but that's why understanding the life myth is to understand just the threads and the storylines of your life without necessarily having to sort of break it all down into its facts and figures. Um, and to understand that you're being carried by something, that your journey is being carried by something. And that to me is medicine. I like that what's coming now is like almost like a re-entry into the social world, the the social work world. Uh, because one of the things that comes up for me is like how do we bring the medicine to the people that need the medicine? And it feels like that's
Mm.
that's something that's maybe opening up uh
Mm.
as you move forward.
Yeah. Can I add something?
Please.
Okay. Yeah. So, and also just reflecting how another component that is really important to me of my work and also my personal life is that I've really appreciated about your presence in what I've been doing. Um, and also just your presence in my world is that in okay in the course, for example, in the course that I'm holding, the spirit world showed me how to structure it, and it showed me very specifically 5 guest speakers, right, who should be part of it, and you're one of them, and the other 4 are all women.
Mm.
And so in my work in general, there is now a pretty strong emphasis on, I would say, the honoring of, and this is not on purpose. This is not something I've consciously chosen to do. It's just what's showing up, is this honoring of the wisdom of the elder feminine is
Mm.
really, really a prominent theme. So the people I tend to collaborate with or connect, is like the other 4 people are, I would say, representatives of the beautiful elder feminine energy, like Melanie
Mm.
Reinhardt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely
Mm-hmm.
fits that category.
Yeah.
And my clients almost entirely are women, probably 55 and older. Most of them, I would say, are actually in their 60s and 70s, interestingly. And I'm
Mm.
turning 47. So I have almost no clients who are my age or younger. Really, really interesting. Um, but, and I love that. I love all of that. Again, I haven't done that on purpose, but it's beautiful. I love it. And what could happen in that is that I could choose to really just go into that re-embracing of the feminine and all of that. And a lot of the work that I've done, those symposiums, the Rebecoming the One symposiums, have been all about holding space for a healing of our relationship to gender and sexuality. So I could have taken a path that is goes down the road of reclaiming the divine feminine and being very angry about the results of the negative side of patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not where my soul is calling me, right? What I'm really being called to do is re-becoming the one
Mm.
and living the one light, right?
Mm.
Those are the, like, well, living the one light is the overarching directive for all of my work and what I'm supposed to be holding space for. So that doesn't mean castrating anybody. That
Mm.
doesn't mean throwing the guy off the mountaintop. you know, that doesn't feel good ultimately, even if a certain part of the feminist 21-year-old in me, would maybe have a tendency to do something like that. My soul brings me back, straight back to the beauty and the love and the wholeness inside myself of my own inner feminine, my own inner masculine, etc. And something I've said to you is that I feel like in your work and who you are, in the way you hold space, all of it, it is a really and the fact that you name these things, like, hang on a second, you could be without maybe intending to, you could be castrating somebody right now. you
Yeah.
know, like when you say that, I go, my soul goes, oh, yes.
Mm.
Right. And my own inner masculine, who at this point I have a really, really beautiful relationship. I love him. Like, I don't want to
Mm.
be castrating anybody.
Mm.
And then he goes, yeah, that's right.
Because
Yeah.
that's a
So I just,
dangerous,
yeah.
dangerous path, right? And
Mm,
yeah, because if we are, and it's just as you were describing that, I was thinking about how your chart, the moon is rising and the sun is setting. like in your chart. And
Mm.
so, of course, you're going to be more in the lunar and then
Mm.
allowing the sun to set,
Mm.
right? In that sense. And those are the two lights in our sky. Those are luminaries, as we call them, right? The big circle of lights, that are the fascinating thing about our solar system. I know you've been getting more into the astronomy lately, right? Is that
Mm.
the sun is 400 times larger than the moon and 400 times further away. And that's why
Yes.
they're the same size, which there's no
Mm.
reason they should be the same size, actually. One could be
Mm.
much bigger than the other one, and that would also make total logical sense. But they just happen to be so similar in size that eclipses can happen, you
Mhm.
know. And this whole kind of dance that goes on between them is so poetically orchestrated. Um, and so then we can look out into the world and say, there's obviously too much solar light, too much heroicism, too much patriarchy, too much father, too much masculine. And the way to deal with that is, very simple minded castration, dispel all of the things of masculinity or men, and then throw that all away. And then we'll be in the paradise of the feminine,
Mm-mm.
clearly an incorrect path. And so then I try to speak to that on this channel. I try to speak to the complexity within that because of course, yeah, there's so much to recover from in what's happened and the injustice in the world and what's happened to women over the ages and the not being able to vote and the not being able to have a place in society and just being kind of locked and chained into the kitchen. And there's deep healing to be had there, but the way to healing is not to destroy the other side of the equation, because then we get really bad results the other way. And I can feel that in that full moon chart of yours just right now, speaking of
Mm.
how to find the balancing out between the setting sun and the rising moon. And
Wow.
Gemini up the top holding the tension of opposites of those two.
Mm.
And yeah, just as you were speaking then I could really sense the chart really coming to life, and that's what I always get most excited by, with this
And
work and
and
with this realm.
your Mars is sitting right on my midheaven.
Sits right up there of looking at that.
It's like, hang on a second. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Martha, thank you so much. I'd just love to,
Mhm.
I feel like we've come a long way in this conversation. And I just want to thank you for opening up your sun, which is the capital S self, and opening to my audience and to me. And I've just really enjoyed wandering along with you. I could just feel so many times the story of the world interacting with the story of the self. It's been fascinating. I feel like I know you much better after these 90 minutes. And you've referenced a couple of times the course that you're doing, and I know that's just kicking off now. And I'm also kicking off my fireside chats this weekend, which is going to be really enjoyable. On Martha's course, I'm doing basically what I've just done over the last year. I'm doing it in a different format over the next year, but in this privately held fireside chat group that we have within your course. Is there anything you would like to say about your course and how people could find that and get involved?
Um, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say this course, we've already started. We're in the second month. But people are welcome to still join. And if I would say it's especially great for people who do want to be held in a way for the cosmos and your own soul knowing to come back alive, um and it's what the spirit world calls is a portal of remembering. So
Mm,
that's really what it's about is uh yeah, both having that more traditional structure of learning, what is Pisces, what is Jupiter, what is
hmm
Neptune, all that, but then taking that data and then most importantly letting it come alive as you and remembering it through each of our own beings as a collective. And then you are going to bring in, Chris, are you going to bring in the mythology aspect of it and the beauty and the sacredness, I would say, of the Greek and Roman stories, which again, I feel like in a certain version of where my astrology could go is a version that gets pretty upset, by these more patriarchal-ish, you could label them patriarchal stories.
Yeah.
And then I feel like you're like, I've been asked to invite you in to remind us of the sacredness of them. And I'm really looking forward to that. All of it, all of it, all of the above.
Me too. Amazing. Well, I recommend I'll leave some links down there in the show notes for people who are listening, and you can click on those and go to Martha's website and get involved. Highly, highly recommended. As she said, although it's in the second month, it's a long journey, a long voyage that you guys are taking, and people can still get on the boat as it pulls out from the port.
Yeah, and just to note, you're welcome to join Chris's part just by itself. There are some people who are joining not my whole astrology course, just joining the fireside chat with Chris part.
Indeed. So I'll leave a link to that too if you'd just like to, if you've enjoyed this year that we've had and you'd love to go a little deeper into these myths and be in a room where we can do that, that'd be actually a fantastic way to go on the journey again now that you know what the journey is. Gathering yourself into the big round and going again. So I'll leave a link to that. It'll be on Sundays, Pacific time, and we'll be going one sign at a time, starting with Pisces this weekend. So this podcast, well, hang on, it's already started because you're hearing this a week after it started, but you can still join in from the Aries round. And you would have only missed the Pisces one, which happened last week, because now I'm talking into the future.
Yes, but it'll be recorded, so it will be there.
It'll be there, so you can
it'll
get
be
in
there.
there.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Martha. Really appreciate you and for coming on the show and for being my my guest to round out the year of the stories embedded within our sky. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for holding space for beauty in the way that you do.
And thank you for doing the same in your own way that's different to mine, but has a lot of similarities. Amazing. All right.